Welcome to the Run for God Run Club, where you will find God in a runner's space.
Welcome to the Run for God Run Club. This is your one stop each week to be motivated and inspired to get off the couch and onto the running trail where you can, in turn, inspire others to do the same. Let's learn, laugh, and leap into running together, giving God the glory for what we are able to do in His name. Amen. Well, I am your running host, Dean Thompson, and we are once again coming to you from the Upward Sports Studio. Buckle in today, because we have a great story for you. We like to say there's more than running going on here. Well, this story, it kind of explains that sentiment really well. And then I'm going to share the reason why visualization doesn't always work. And joining me for those stories and much more is Run for God founder Mitchell Hollis.
Thanks for having me, Dean. I was just sitting here looking at my hand. I was outside yesterday afternoon. Do you have those, I call them yellow flies or biting flies around your house?
Occasionally.
Whew. Man, they will light you up.
Yeah, they will.
And one landed on my hand yesterday, and it stung me or bit me or whatever they do. And last night, my hand looked like
oh my goodness.
I looked like I had 30 pounds in my hand.
Wow.
But I just noticed the swelling's going down. But man, those things,
wow.
they will light you up. So if you've never heard of biting flies, come to North Georgia and you'll experience it.
I've never had that kind of reaction from one. Wow, that's amazing.
Yeah, I've never had either. I've been stung by them before. But it swelled up pretty good.
You sure it wasn't a wasp?
No, because I saw it.
Wow.
I was on my tractor and I saw it land on my hand, and before I could smack it, it got me.
Just a little too quick, not quick enough.
Yeah. So how's your week been? So as of this recording, you're done with your 100-miler.
Yes.
So let's prophesize. How did you do, Dean?
My gut tells me that. Well,
just to be clear, we're recording this before your 100-miler, but it's going to air after your 100-miler.
It was awesome. It was awesome.
That's a good outlook.
Yeah, it was awesome.
Good job,
awesome.
Dean.
Hot. It was hot.
I'm going to go ahead and say good job.
Yeah, there you go.
So did you think you podiumed?
No.
You don't?
No, I don't think so.
Okay.
Yeah. I didn't go with that intention. In other words, I didn't really try to do that. I wanted to be conservative and not go too hard.
I think you're in the top 3.
Well, we'll see. That would be awesome.
I have really no basis for that, but I've just got a hunch.
I would enjoy that if it were the case.
That would be pretty cool.
It would be pretty cool.
Yeah.
But I'm just.
But you feel like you made it.
I'm just happy I'm done.
It was hard.
Yes.
You think it's going to be the hardest thing you've ever done?
Yes.
As far as race wise?
Yes. Yeah. I do. I don't have any doubt about it. I'm almost 100% sure of it. So I'll be very surprised if I come back and say, you know what, that wasn't that bad.
Now, you know, one thing I've heard about, you kind of hear this with Ironman stuff, but especially the long endurance, the ultra marathon stuff. I've always heard that you can't hardly go to sleep the night after.
Oh, yeah?
Because your heart rate has been up for so long. I've heard of this. Andy Meyer was actually telling me about this years ago, that a lot of guys, especially if it goes really, really long, you know, past 12, 15 hours or so, that your heart rate's been up for so long that guys, they're exhausted, they're tired, but they can't go to sleep. So I'm curious to see if you experience that.
Yeah, that'll be interesting to see.
Yeah. I don't know if you've ever read about that or not.
I haven't.
Yeah.
But that's an interesting, it makes sense.
Yeah.
It does make sense. I've been that way before where I'm just tired and I just can't go to sleep because it's just something about you. It's just keyed up and still wanting to, almost like your body wants to keep going.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, we'll see. Well, listen, thank you to all those out there who have shared the podcast. It looks like our numbers are up a little bit recently. And so thank you for those of you who have done that. And if you haven't done that, please go ahead and do it and keep helping us spread the word because we know that people have come to Christ as a result of listening to something they heard. Somebody's story.
2 decisions this past week.
Yeah, see?
Wow. And so... yeah, I mean, again, we say this all the time. It's just we pinch ourselves, just knowing that we got a front row seat to see what God's doing here. And it's nothing we do. But the fact that people out there are sharing this podcast, they're liking it, they're giving it comments, it's confirming.
Yeah.
It's it's a great feeling to know that we're able to play a part
Yep.
in what God's doing through this ministry. So thank you.
For sure. Our post from last week from Jessica Funk Malone, a very short one. She said, "Hi, I struggle with the heat. I'm doing the marathon trainer. Last year, I would run early in the morning to beat the heat. Is it a bad idea for me to avoid running in the heat, being as a marathon will be hours long?" This is a great question, isn't it? I love this question and the thought here. There's a fine line here too, because what she's hinting at here, she's absolutely right about. She does need to run in the heat some, because you need to get acclimatized to that. But here's what happens with many, many people who say, I can't run in the heat. Mm-hmm. For many of those people, they don't do it enough to get themselves, their body acclimated to it. And if you don't get acclimated to it, it's always going to be hard. Sure. The first time it turns hot every year, it's hard for me. But you just stay out there and you stay at it day after day, and eventually it never gets easy. Yeah. But it becomes less hard over time, probably both mentally and physically, right? So there's a couple of ways you can attack this. First, you can go out there and you can just purposefully say, okay, I'm going to run 1, 2, 3 days a week in the heat, and everything else I'll run. And let your body get acclimated to it that way. Or you can just jump in and say, I'm just going to run in the heat every day this week. And what you'll find is, of course, the more days, the more you expose yourself to. If you get out there and you just say, okay, I'm just gonna run in this heat until I get used to it, you're going to get used to it faster than you will if you do it 2 days a week. It's going to take, a couple of months probably. Yeah. But if you do it every day, it's probably going to take 2 weeks. Yeah. And so it just depends on how much you want to endure to get there, right?
Yeah. I mean, your body does acclimate. I can relate this back to my building days when we were framing a lot. Of course, you love the shoulder seasons. You love the spring and the fall and the winter and the summer on any job outside, especially framing. You're just out in the middle. There is no shade in framing because you're trying to build the shade.
Right.
And, but I would remember, those first few hot days, it would just be miserable. But within 2 weeks, you find yourself out there drinking coffee in the middle of the day. Yeah. And it's like it doesn't bother you at all. And the same thing for the wintertime. We're building fires and, going to take a break and standing by the fire every 5 minutes. And before you know it, it's gotten colder. It's into January now, and you're not even building a fire. Yep. And so both ways you acclimate, but you're right. It's if you kind of dip in and then dip back out and dip back in and dip back out, you really don't get acclimated because you're getting a taste of it's kind of like the shoulder seasons. You're putting a jacket on in the morning, you're taking it off in the afternoon. You just can't ever get comfortable. But if you'll just do it, rip the Band-Aid off, and now be smart. You got to stay hydrated and be careful. But
for sure,
you need to run in the heat.
Yep. And it reminds me of these people. And if I'm talking about you, I'm so sorry, but this is just the way I feel about it. Okay. There's people who will keep their house cooler in the summer than they keep it in the winter. Which is opposite of what you should be doing. Yeah. You should keep it cooler in the winter so that there's not as big of a difference from outside to inside. But people
if you want a cheaper power bill, for sure.
Well, that too. Yeah. That too. That's the reason why I do it. But I mean, it is better because you have less of a difference. Yeah. The more difference you have, the harder it's going to be.
Yeah, there's nothing worse than walking out of a 67-degree building into a 100-degree afternoon. Yeah. I mean, it just knocks you down like a ton of bricks.
But if you keep your house in the 80s, like I do.
No, I don't go that high.
Then
that's a little excessive, Dean.
We might keep it at 78 some, okay. but 78 to 80 is where we keep it. And so when I walk outside and it's an 85-degree day, it just doesn't feel that hot. Yeah. So anyway, I heard a really great thought recently about this that I wanted to share. There was a guy who was talking about shop classes. And
what kind of classes?
Yeah, you don't have shop classes anymore.
Oh yeah.
Nowadays schools don't really have. I mean,
shop
some do.
Medals. I used to have all those classes.
All those classes. Yeah. But what the shop classes taught us is you understand woodworking. Mm-hmm. What happens if you take, and I need to cut a 2x6 in half, and I've got 2 sawhorses, and what happens if I put that 2x6 on the two sawhorses and I try to cut it right in the center between the two sawhorses, what happens?
Pinch.
It binds, right? Why do we know that? Because we know that the safety aspect and how it relates to cutting that wood. And so we know that what you do is you put it across and you cut off the end and you let it drop off the end, right? We learn that. Today, we don't do anything to learn that. So today what we hear is, back then it was like, is it dangerous around shop equipment? It is. But we learned how to manage around the danger. Today, we don't do anything to manage around the danger. And so
we just say it's dangerous, don't do it.
Right. Yeah. And so we avoid it completely.
Yeah.
Well, we don't need to do that.
Right.
We need to get out there in the heat. Is running in the heat dangerous? Well, it depends on how you define dangerous, and it depends on what that heat is. But don't be afraid to do hard things. Take precautions, just like on cutting that 2x6. Do it the right way, but do it.
Yeah.
And you'll get better at it over time.
Yeah, I mean, another good example, and we may get in trouble here. We're probably walking up to the line here. But when I was a kid, we had football practice and baseball practice, and we didn't have the wet bubble reading and all this stuff. But you know why? It's because when I was a kid, leading up to summer football practice, I was outside all day long.
That's right.
I mean, I didn't have a wet bubble. When I got hot, I went and found a water hose, and I got in the shade for a little bit. Yeah, you're right. I mean, there's so many ways we don't acclimate ourselves nowadays. We avoid things rather than getting used to things. And it's good. Doing hard things is good.
Yes. And it's good that we have those, right? It's great that we have the air conditioning that we have and that we are more comfortable than we used to be.
Yeah.
We need to intentionally make ourselves uncomfortable.
For sure. Yeah.
Our trivia question from last week. What is the oldest ultra marathon in the world? It is the Comrades Marathon in South Africa. Now, have you heard of that one?
I have not.
No. Wow. Comrades it's a 55-mile race. It's point to point. It's a really interesting concept, the way they do Comrades. Now, they've been doing this race since 1921. They've been doing this 55-mile race. And I think it changes by a few miles sometimes. But what they do is they have an up version and a down version. Every other year it's up and every other year it's down. So there's a net elevation change from 3,000 feet to 300 feet.
Wow. And
so some years you run downhill, some years you run uphill. And it's a fascinating concept. But the race began in 1921. It was kind of like a memorial kind of thing. It was a way to honor soldiers who had died in war in South Africa. The race is run in June. Now it's been in May in the past, but it's right around May, June.
But that's their winter time over there, right?
I'm not sure what
I think summer is their winter.
I think that's right. Yeah. Listen to this. They limit the entries to 25,000 people for a 55-mile race. Is that crazy?
How have I not heard of that?
Yeah.
Being that big.
Yeah. So, and in every year since 1988, all but 3 years since 1988, they've had at least 10,000 people who have finished this 55-mile race. That's incredible. And the way the awards work is you get a medal depending on your time. So if you finish in the top 10, you get one medal. If you finish under, I think, 6 hours, you get a color medal. If you finish between 6 and 7 hours, it's a different color. And so you get these different color medals depending on when you finish, which is pretty cool. And then if you run this over and over again, when you run your 10th Comrades Marathon, you get a permanent number. They send you a number, and that becomes your number from then on, forever. That's your number.
That's a cool idea.
Isn't that a cool idea? And you have to bring that number back the next year. Use the same one. I think that's really cool. So
if you bring your same number back, you get like 50% discount.
I don't know. Yeah, I don't know what
the cool things you could do with that.
Yeah,
that's a good idea.
Yeah, I thought it was a pretty cool idea. Now, the first woman to run Comrades actually ran it back in 1923. She ran it in 11 hours and 35 minutes, but women were not officially, she banded it because they wouldn't allow women or black people to run the race. It was in South Africa. You had apartheid and all that stuff.
Yeah.
Women weren't allowed to participate until 1975, which is about the same time that Boston allowed women into the race. All that sounds familiar. Some interesting names attached to this. Wally Hayward. He won the race when he was in his 20s, and then he won it again when he was in his 40s, and then he became the oldest person to ever complete the race when he was 80. So I just think that's, most of the time the fast people, they don't keep coming back. You had Johnny Kelly was a special guy at Boston because he kept coming back after he had won it when he was young, and he was still running into his 80s. I think that's cool.
Yeah. I just had a conversation. This is kind of off topic, but it's not, because he was talking about the oldest to complete. I love the older generation who don't see themselves as older.
Yeah.
Like he obviously, he's got the mind of a 40-year-old probably running a 55-mile race in his 80s. I just got off a phone call. It's actually my neighbor. I don't know if you know Drennan Crutchfield or not. He's my neighbor next door, owns the farm up here.
Yeah.
And he's 95 years old.
Wow.
And we were talking about another neighbor down the road here, and he was saying, he said, I hear he's in pretty bad shape. He's in his 70s.
As if 70s was old.
Yeah, he was describing a guy down the road who's not doing too well. He's on a walker and he's not doing too well because he's in his 70s. He's 95 and he just had hip replacement surgery. Still drives everywhere. He's but he's an example of this 80-year-old guy. It's like he doesn't equate that he's 95 because he's talking about one of his neighbors saying he's not doing too good. He's in his 70s. I don't know why I just thought about that, because I just got off the phone call before you walked in.
Well, and I don't know him, but I'll almost guarantee you that he's one of those guys who he's never slowed down. No. He's always been moving all the time. And that's the thing is you can't stop. You got to keep moving.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And he wasn't going to let a hip replacement. I guarantee you he had to argue with the doctor.
Yeah.
Because most doctors, they wouldn't operate on a 95-year-old like that. Yeah. Especially hip replacement. But he did it.
That's a great story.
He, in his mind, he's 40 years old.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, we don't hear about comrades much in America, I think, because, we hear about Badwater. We hear about Western states. We hear about, and for good reason. Those are the local races they're ultras. But comrades is probably the most well-known ultramarathon in the world. And here's an interesting thing about comrades is probably the most famous person to ever win comrades was not an ultramarathon runner. He was a marathon runner. Alberto Salazar won comrades back in 1994. So I don't know. I think that's...
Now, what does comrades mean? That means friends, doesn't it? Does that mean friends?
Yeah, a little bit more than friends, but yeah.
Yeah.
I don't particularly like the word because it kind of is used in communistic terms usually.
Oh, really?
But yeah.
Okay.
But it's,
I didn't know that.
It is what it is. It doesn't have to mean that. Just...
I thought it was kind of an endearing friendship term.
It is.
Okay.
It is.
I got you.
It is. Yeah.
Okay.
But great race.
Yeah.
Up years, down years. It's a really cool concept.
Cool.
Upward Sports equips churches to run self-sustaining sports ministries in their communities. Whether you're a sports fanatic or on staff at a church, Upward Sports will give you all the tools you need to run a first-class sports ministry that allows you to reach families in your community. Upward Sports offers basketball, soccer, flag football, cheerleading, volleyball, baseball, and softball through league and camp offerings. At Upward Sports, we want to help your church make a difference and give you increased opportunities to share the gospel. Learn more today at upward.org. That's upward.org.
All right, we're back, and I've gotten a few stories lately, but we still need some stories. So don't forget to submit your story at runforgod.com. Go to the tab that says Submit My Story, and you can do that. So please do that. We need them. It makes this podcast better, so do that. I saw this cool story from a site called The Conversation. And the question was, why are some people faster than others? And of course, there's several reasons, and this is what they say. There are several reasons why some people can run very fast while others tend to run more slowly. Genetics, the traits you inherit from your parents, play a role, but so do your choices and experiences. And it goes on to talk about genetics, about the fast twitch fibers versus slow twitch fibers. We've talked about that. You have 600 muscles in your body, and your body is typically made up of either predominantly fast twitch muscle fiber or predominantly slow twitch muscle fiber. And the more fast twitch you have, the faster you can run at short distances. The more slow twitch you can run, the better you can run in endurance events. And it's why we tend to have people who either are sprinters or they're distance runners, and nobody is both, because it's all about your muscle makeup. They also talk about your brain, because your brain is what gives your muscles the instructions to do what they're doing. And so obviously there's a huge mental and physically your brain. There's a lot to how you train your brain to do the things that it does. So you're training yourself not just to push your body farther, but to convince your brain to allow your body to go further, right? Which is cool. And of course, your brain gets more efficient over time. The more you run, the more steps you take. Each time you take a step, your body becomes more efficient. And we call it running economy. And so that's another way that the brain is affected. And then couple of other things they didn't even mention in here, the physiological makeup. In other words, how efficient is your heart? Some people's heart's just more efficient than others. The racehorse Secretariat is well known that his heart was really larger than any other horse. And that's part of the reason why he could run so well. So how your body is made up, some people, genetically have stronger or weaker hearts than others. Lung capacity is another thing. Some people are, Debbie's got limited lung capacity because of some of the things that she's been through. I've got great lung capacity, and so it makes a difference on how we're able to run.
I think that is true when you start looking at the faster people. But I would submit that the number one reason why some people are faster than others overall in the sport of running has nothing to do with any of this.
Why do you think?
It's work ethic.
Yeah.
From a global look at all runners, recreational runners, new runners, seasoned runners, it's who is going to get out there day after day and do the work. I think that's what it really comes. Now, all of this is absolutely true. Yeah. But I think that was sticking out to me when you were talking about when you asked the question, why are some people faster than others?
Some people are willing to put in the work to do it.
Yeah, because if you put in the work, you will get great results. Yeah. No matter where you're at on the genetics.
But you won't necessarily be fast.
You'll get faster.
You will get faster. Yeah. Relatively speaking, you will get faster. Yeah. But somebody who goes out and today, runs a mile in 15 minutes is not going to get to a point where they can run a mile in 6 minutes. Probably, yeah. Yeah.
But I mean, it's like we used to always say, we would rather have, when we were talking about young people, we would rather have 10 Andrew Stampers.
Yep.
Versus one, and I'm not going to say any names, that have all the natural talent in the world, but they're just not willing to work.
Yep, for sure.
The Andrews is always going to outdo that other person in the long run.
Yep.
That's my point.
Yeah, I love it. Well, how about a story from a long-time Run for God faithful person? I love this story, and it comes from Linda Null, and it says, it's called How Running Opened More Than My Airways.
Hey, Dean, before you start that, let's say what happened this past week. So Linda Null, which is a longtime contributor of this podcast, of the devotions, and Irene Tang, who is a longtime contributor and devotion writer, who had never met. Yeah. But as we always say, they've known each other through Run Club and Run for God for years. They finally met. Yeah. They finally met. They posted a picture, and it was really cool to see that those two from Missouri, Linda's from Missouri. Irene's from California / Illinois. Indiana, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
And it was just cool to see those two worlds come together, because both of them have submitted tons and tons of stories to this podcast.
Yeah. And I love both of them's heart.
Yeah, for sure.
It was awesome to see. Ologist, a person working with a specific part of the body or a specific disease. A little over 2 decades ago, I became familiar with several ologists: a cardiologist, pulmonologist, dermatologist, urologist, ophthalmologist, and about every other ologist you can think of. After being misdiagnosed with everything from bronchitis to non-Hodgkin lymphoma over a 3-year period, I was finally correctly diagnosed with an autoimmune condition known as sarcoidosis. Although it had affected many parts of my body, it really did a number on my lungs, leaving me with irreversible lung damage. Because I was borderline stage 3 or 4, I was sent to a support group where I would meet other sarcoid patients. When I saw some stage 4 patients pulling oxygen carts behind them, I bolted and ran, literally. I suppose I thought I could escape what appeared to be inevitable. I quickly determined that I needed to find an alternative to opening my airways that did not involve inhalers or oxygen tanks. Thus, my journey in running began as I ran to simply keep breathing. What began as a way to simply breathe opened up so much more than the airways in my lungs. Running opened my eyes, giving me a new lens through which to view life. I can only compare this to how Paul must have felt when he was blinded on the road to Damascus and then healed of his blindness. Paul was never the same again after this encounter with Jesus in Acts. In Acts 9:18, it says, "Immediately something like scales fell from Saul's eyes and he could see again. He got up and was baptized." Just like Paul, I realized that I had worn blinders for so long about so many things. I attended church and had been baptized, but my worship could be described more as obligatory than passionate. At a time when I was feeling most alone, I felt God draw near to me, especially on my runs in a nearby national wildlife refuge where I did most of my running. Those quiet country roads literally became a refuge for my soul where the outside world was silenced. I could hear and feel God whispering to me through His beautiful creation surrounding me. I became filled with gratefulness for the setting I was in. I began noticing everything around me and became fully aware of His presence like I had never experienced before. Often, feelings of gratitude swept over me, leading me to tears of joy. In hindsight, I could now see that God had always been with me and that He was waiting for me to see the light, His light. Like Paul, not only were my eyes opened, but my heart was open to the glory of who God is. I could say with honesty and humility that I knew God because I had experienced God. My worship now became fueled by the desire to know Him better. Then God opened the eyes of my heart to people. My heart softened as I saw them all as God's children, whom He loved just as much as He loved me. I became curious about people, striking up conversations, sometimes with complete strangers, and finding myself connecting to them in so many ways. I would listen to their stories, and at times I felt I saw a glimpse of God in their eyes. Knowing Jesus empowered me to become more empathetic and kinder to others. Over time, it became obvious to me that the key to following Jesus was relationship, first to God, then to others. As Matthew 26:36-39 says, "Teacher, which is the greatest commandment in the law?" Jesus replied, "Love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, and with all your mind. This is the first and greatest commandment. And the second is like it. Love your neighbor as yourself. All the law and the prophets hang on these 2 commandments." It is only through our relationship with God and our relationships with people that we can bring others into God's kingdom. This I know. Had I not been so sick in my late 40s, I wouldn't be where I am today, physically, mentally, and especially spiritually. To this day, I believe God used running as a lifeline for me. But as we say in Run for God, there's much more going on here than just running. There is a community of believers whose loving relationships with one another enable them to shine their lights for Jesus. As I continue this journey, one step at a time, I will hold fast to the one who rescued me from my old self to give me a new life and hope in Him.
Linda, that's a great story.
Isn't that great? So beautifully written.
I love how she points out Matthew 26:36 through 39, specifically love your neighbor as yourself. I heard somebody say something the other day, and I've heard it said this, this sentiment said before, but they said it really pointed. They said, how you love a person says nothing about them and everything about you. And man, that's really convicting that, we're called to love no matter how worthy that person is to love.
Yeah.
And I don't know. I heard that the other day in a podcast, and it really just stuck with me. And then she brings it up again here. So maybe God's trying to tell me something. But I love Linda's stories. She's got such a incredible heart for Christ, and how she intertwines that with her journey is it's amazing.
Yeah, yeah. Well, that phrase, there's more than running going on here. It's so true. I don't know what Linda was like before she started running, obviously, but man, I do know that if she was indifferent at one time, it's hard to believe.
Yeah,
because of how you know her now, right? And there's millions of people in this country and many others who just need to be open to the possibilities of what God can do in their lives. Mm-hmm. And it's why, you say all the time, you got to find time to do nothing. And running it's not nothing that we're doing, but our mind is free.
Sure.
When we're running, and it allows us to think freely. And if we never find time to do that, we don't get, this is what happened to Linda. Mm-hmm. Linda was busy with life and doing all these things, and she finally had the opportunity to let her mind go to where God was and let God in. And we have to slow down, right?
Yeah. Cause just yesterday, our upward team meeting, I'll have to be transparent here. I had forgotten that I had the devotion for yesterday morning. And so last minute, I realized that I had it. So I kind of cheated a little bit, and I just sent in one of our God Thoughts videos and played it. And it was the one entitled Satan's Convention. If you want to see it, just Google on YouTube, or go to YouTube and search Run for God, Satan's Convention. But that's what that video is about. It's how Satan is not using the things he's never going to use the things that are just obvious. Sometimes he does. I shouldn't say he's not, because he does sometimes, the big things. But I think more times than not, what Satan uses now is our time.
Yeah.
He fills every second of our schedules. And that's what that video is. It's not a script I wrote. It's one I was telling about that I'd read somewhere, and what I don't even know who the author is. Yeah. But it's a great story about. It's kind of like the screw tape letters. It's the stance from it's the stance from Satan saying, how are we going to get Christians off their game? And he's not doing it with the big things. Yep. He's doing it with your time.
Yep.
We need to be cognizant of that.
Yeah, if you haven't seen that or read the Screw Tape Letters, Screw Tape Letters is a pretty short book.
Yeah.
And it's entertaining. It's really entertaining, but it's really profound at the same time.
Sure.
Yeah.
Yeah.
How about Acts 9:17 and 18? Then Ananias went to the house and entered it. Placing his hands on Saul, he said, Brother Saul, the Lord Jesus, who appeared to you on the road as you were coming here, has sent me so that you may see again and be filled with the Holy Spirit. Immediately, something like scales fell from Saul's eyes, and he could see again. He got up and was baptized.
The amazing part of that scripture is obviously Saul. But have you ever sat and thought about that verse from Ananias' standpoint?
And about how God used him?
He was going in. I mean, God said, go confront Saul, who was coming here to kill Christians, to persecute them.
To kill him, basically.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. There is so much faith on display right there.
Yeah.
From Ananias going in. Because Ananias didn't know what was about to happen. Ananias doesn't know the rest of the story like we know it today. All he knew is God was calling him to go in and talk to a Christian murderer and basically telling him to repent and be baptized.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
I mean, if you really sit back and think, that's almost as it's just as amazing as the story of Paul. It's faith on display.
Yeah.
I mean, really.
That's a great observation.
Because you know what I always say, true boldness is putting your faith into something when the only thing you have to fall back on is what you've claimed to put your faith in. He had nothing to fall back on here.
That's right. All he was doing is trying to be faithful to what God told him to do.
Sure. It could have went really bad, but God.
But look what happened.
Yeah.
Wow. I'm struck by the difference between the way God got Saul's attention, and the way he got Linda's attention.
Mm-hmm.
You know, the difference in their personalities. Saul was a firebrand. He just, he was drive, and he was passionate about everything he did. And the only way God was going to get his attention was to just strike him blind, stop him in his tracks, and say, dude, pay attention, right? But in Linda's case, much different person, much different disposition. All it took was for God to say, I just want you to be quiet. I just want you to just be still for just a little while and just think. Mm-hmm. Just look at this nature around you. And, one is in public, out in front of everybody and very bold, and the other is just subtle and behind the scenes and private. Mm-hmm. And I'm just struck by how different those two things are. God can get our attention in so many different ways, right?
Yeah. And I think he does the same thing in Scripture. I think it's people read things differently. I've been wrestling with a doctrinal thing in Scripture, and I've been really studying. I think I've mentioned it on last week's podcast. Mm-hmm. And I sat down and I was talking to my pastor about it, and he said, there's just some things in the Bible that just aren't clear. And man, I just hate to hear that, because I want it to be clear. I want it to be obvious, and he's right. There's so many things in Scripture that just aren't clear. And he explained it to me in a way that made so much sense. He said, some people are going to need to read what we're talking about one way because of their personality, and God is going to speak to them through that. But for other people, they need to read it a different way.
Yep.
And he's speculating. He's not saying that's the reason, but he said that's what I feel, that there's some ambiguity. I don't know if ambiguity is the right word. There's just some things that we don't have the answers to.
Yeah.
And so we fall on one side or the other. And these aren't salvation issues. These are the things that I say don't matter. They matter a lot, but in the realm of salvation, they don't. But he said some things just aren't clear because God needs to use those in many different ways throughout history, and he has.
Yeah.
And I don't know, it was just a really good, and it's kind of the same thing here. I mean, God knows all of our personalities, and he will use things. But also, on the flip side of that, so does the devil.
Yeah.
The devil will use things on you that he'll never use on me.
That's right.
He knows, they know where we struggle, and he knows where we struggle. God knows where we thrive.
That's right.
And
wow,
it's a fight.
Yeah, for sure. And the truth is, God can use anybody.
Sure.
I don't know if you've seen. Do you know who Russell Brand is? Mm-mm. Pay any attention? Russell Brand is he's a celebrity. I think he's British. He lived a.
Has he got the long hair?
Yeah.
Yeah. I know he is.
He lived a terrible life. I mean, the stuff that he did was just awful, awful stuff, right? And he's become a Christian, and he's very outspoken about it. And this is a guy who, his artfulness with the English language is astounding. Mm-hmm. If you've never listened, you need to listen to a podcast with him on it, because it's amazing how that man can talk and string words together. It's incredible. And now, just like Paul was passionate in one way, and God took that passion and turned it on its head to use for him, you got somebody like Russell Brand, who has this eloquence about him, and now God's got him on his side. It's pretty cool to see what God can do with people.
What's what we always say, Mark Yoho used to tell me, because I used to get so just beat up with some of the comments on social media. Yeah. I mean, it was, especially in the early days, it was like people were just coming after us, and they were trolls. But he said the great thing about those people is man, they are the most vile people and most loud. It's the silent minority. He said, but if you can ever turn those people, man, you've got a tiger by the tail then, because they'll be Paul. They go from Saul to Paul. And so I've always looked at that ever since then. It's the people that are lashing out the hardest. He said, number one, those are usually the people that are under the most conviction.
Yeah.
Something is going and they just can't. God is really stirring their heart and they don't like it. But if you can ever be part of, God turning them, man, you've got something then.
Yeah, yeah. Matthew 22:36-39, Teacher, which is the greatest commandment in the law? Jesus replied, Love the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your soul and with all your mind. This is the first and greatest commandment. And the second is like it. Love your neighbor as yourself.
Simple.
Yeah. Again, and it's back to this God using people that, God basically is using the Pharisees here to teach us a great lesson. Who was worse off than the Pharisees in this day, right? Yeah. It is simple, but it's hard.
Yeah.
It's simple, but it's hard.
But again, like the quote I heard the other day, loving your neighbor says nothing about your neighbor. And it says everything about you. And that's convicting. That's toe stomping right there. But it's what Matthew's saying here.
Yeah.
Or what Jesus is saying here.
Yep. John 13:34-35. A new command I give you, love one another as I have loved you, so you must love one another. By this, everyone will know that you are my disciples if you love one another. Again, this seems really, really simple, right? But again, for some of us, it's harder than it should be. This is one. You're a people person. I'm not really I'm not what I call a people person.
You are a people person.
I love people, but I'm not good at just being in a crowd and just mingle. The word mingle.
Yeah, but it takes you about 3 seconds to figure it out when you get in a crowd.
Depends.
Yeah.
Depends on what we're talking about.
Yeah.
Right? If we're talking about something biblical,
I've never seen
great.
you sheepish in a crowd. I think you're good around people.
You have. You just don't know it.
Well, maybe internally.
Yeah. That's what I mean.
But you've learned to adapt to that. You've learned to overcome that.
Yeah. But it's hard. It's really hard for me to do that. I got to get psyched up to go to a situation like that because...
See, for all the years I've known you, I can't see it.
No,
I can't see it.
I know. I understand.
You hide it really well.
Well, the thing I noticed about this verse this time was it says, notice what it says, a new command I give you. In other words, it's not just saying that we should do what we've always done. It's not just saying you should just love the people around you as people always had done, I'm sure, up to that point. But he's saying, I want you to do it in a new, different way. I want you to do it deeper. I want you to make those connections even stronger than they ever have been before. And, it's easy to do for something like, we have a new grandson, Beckett. It's easy to love Beckett. Man, it's easy. That kid, he's smiling all the time and he's just, he doesn't know any better. And, if he spits up on you, it's funny, right? It's great, right? Oh, look, he spit up. Isn't that cute? You love it but when somebody that has a different personality than us does something we don't like, we find it really hard to like that person, right? So what's the difference? Beckett here, he's just being who he is. And he's spitting up on me and I should be mad. He just ruined my shirt, right? but it's okay. Well, shouldn't I be that way with other people that just have a personality difference from me, right?
Yeah.
But we find that so hard. So like me, I'm really opinionated. I don't know if you've ever noticed that before.
I've never noticed that, Dean.
But I'm really opinionated. So who are the people I don't like? It's the other people who are opinionated in a different way.
Opinions than you.
Yes. When in truth, we have a lot in common. We just think differently.
You're an expert on your opinion.
I am. I'm really good at it. But anyway, that's just one of those things that I observed that I think that's
so another side story. I've got all these side stories.
You have.
So
lately,
we went to dinner last Friday night with our youth pastor and his wife, 2 kids and 1 adopted child, so 3 kids. And I realized how I'm going to be as a grandpa that night, because Emmett, their little 1-year-old, was, I don't even know, he's not even, yeah, I guess he is one. He was sitting in the high chair right next to me, and he was picking up food and just throwing it. And Tyler was getting on to him.
And you would your kids.
I would my kids.
Yeah.
I mean, we would have went out in the parking lot and had a talking about this. But what did I do Friday night? I was like, just keep doing it, Emmett. Just keep doing it. I was like, there's the difference between kids and grandkids.
Yep.
So I texted both my boys. I said, I'm just letting you know, I'm going to be very different with your kids than I was with you. And see, for years I've been saying, you know, I had, you know, I would get so upset with my mom and dad or Holly's mom and dad, because they would do this exact same thing with Lane and Landon. They were little. I'm like, what are y'all doing? We're trying to teach them something here. Yeah. And now I'm like, Donna and Jerry were right. You know, I'm going to be just like them. I'm going to buy them a set of drums and send it home with them.
Absolutely. And you know what that does? That gives you an opportunity. So, like, let me give you an example. I'll share a story here. My granddaughter, she plays softball, and she's playing catcher, and she's scared. She is terrified of the ball. The ball hit her a couple of times back a few weeks ago, and she's just terrified of the ball. And so she wants to stand back by the backstop and just let the ball go by and just pick it up and throw it back. Now, she's young. It's a small league, so she could do that. But the umpire the other night wouldn't let her do that. He made her squat down behind her. And I love it. My son and his wife, they wanted to just let her be more comfortable. And I was like, no. She needs to do the hard thing, right? This is like we always talk about. My son couldn't go talk to her about it because she's used to hearing from him. But because I do all those things you're talking about.
Voice, yeah.
Yeah, and I let her have the hot chocolate 4 times when she's at my house and do stuff that her parents wouldn't let her have. Because I've done all of that, I've got this bank deposit build up where I can walk over to her and get in the dugout and put my arm around her and go, listen, you can do this. I know you can because I've seen you do it, and it has a big impact on her. And the next inning, she goes out there and she's different.
Sure.
Right? You build up that currency with her, and with like you're talking about when you have grandkids. That's the way it works. You've got this special insight into your kids, because your kids will live.
Well, I mean, we saw it coaching these kids. I mean, the parents would come up to us and say, how are you getting them to do this? Because they would never do it. And it's the same thing with Lane and Landon. I mean, you could tell Lane and Landon something that they would never take from me.
True.
And that's why it's so important. Surround your kids with godly people, because they are going to listen to people outside of you.
Yep.
Period. And so that's why it's important to surround them with godly people.
Great point. Question: have you ever been blinded by things of this world that have prevented you from shining your light for Jesus? What happened that enabled you to remove those blinders? I've shared this story before. I've run more than 10,000 miles on Red Clay Road. It's right near my house. I kind of have to go out on Red Clay Road once we leave our neighborhood. And most of the time people give me space there as I'm running down the road. Every once in a while, I get this car that rides by, and you can just hear it in their voice as they're driving by. They're like, "This is a road for cars. What are you doing running on this road?" You can just hear it, right? And so you get a little frustrated with those people. And very often, that's all it is, because very often the road's wide open. Like they can see for a mile ahead of them, and they still are doing it.
Still crowd you.
They're just being smart about it.
Yeah.
And I remember one man in particular who was that way, and it was every time. I mean, I would see him coming and I would literally get off the road because he wouldn't move at all. Like, most of them will at least try to get over to the line. This guy wouldn't even do that.
He got closer to your line.
Yes, he would stay right in the center of the road. And literally, if I kept running, I probably would have been hit at least by the mirror of his vehicle. And gosh, it was so frustrating. But I knew who the guy was, but I didn't know him. Then he started coming to our church. And I got to know him. And he got to know me, probably even more importantly. And once he got to know me, he started giving me space. Well, how did my feelings for him change? I mean, it was like night and day, right? But he was the same guy. He wasn't different. Now, he was kind of a crusty old guy. I mean, that's who he was, right? But But man, I had a love for that man after I got to know him. Mm-hmm. Well, why shouldn't I be that way when he's getting close to me? Why shouldn't I think, well, if this man knew the situation, he wouldn't be doing this. And I feel instead of being mad at him, have compassion for him instead, right?
Yeah, I used to struggle with that same thing. I think we may have talked about this, and if we have, I'm sorry, but I used to kind of think the same way about people. You just get mad at them. I mean, it's like, why won't this old man give me space on the road? There's 26 foot of asphalt here, and he's crowding me off, and I'm just taking up 2 feet. But years ago, I started this years ago. I started just waving at people. Everybody that passes me on the road, I wave at them. I don't care if they're 2 feet from me or they get all the way in the other lane. You can always tell the runners.
Yeah.
They're all the way in the other lane. Runners or bikers.
Yeah.
But what I've noticed, and I'm seeing the same thing, I live on Lake Francis Road now, which is it's busy. It's not as busy. I mean, it's an old country road, but it's got a lot of traffic. And I started doing the same thing. Yeah. I wave at people. I'm walking it more than anything now. And, but what I see is, I mean, that person because you see the same people. You sit on Red Clay Road. You know just about every car that comes up and down through there. And what I've started seeing is
they start giving you more space.
They start giving you more room. And it's exactly what we just talked about.
Yeah.
It's waving to that person shouldn't say anything about that person. Yep. It should say everything about me. And if that is love. Yep. I mean, a wave can be love. And it can be love to a person that doesn't deserve it.
Yep.
The crusty old guy, he don't deserve it. But if you start waving at people, if you start showing love to people, man, it just breaks down the walls. And before you know it, they're moving over to the other side of the road, or drawing the parallel here, they're willing to sit down with you and talk about things because you showed them love.
Yep.
And it changes everything.
And it chisels a little bit of that crustiness off and softens them up. And man, it's just better for everybody.
Now, the wild card is what happened to me 2 or 3 days ago, which I saw this car coming toward me. I'm over in the grass. It's coming toward me. A wheel gets off into the grass, and I'm like, this is about to go bad. Well, it was 3:45. Cahulla Creek had just let out. Some teenage girl has her phone literally with both hands in front of her. I don't know if she's driving with her knees or her arms, but she has both thumbs and her screen in her face. And when that wheel got off the road, she looked up and she saw me. She probably went home and threw up.
Yeah.
Because it was that close. I mean, I knew I was going to be fine because I could dive over in the ditch. But you know how it is when you look up and something's that close to you.
It's scary.
It scared her way more than it scared me.
Yeah.
So I haven't seen her again, though.
Wow.
So I'm sure I will.
Yeah. Another question. Love your neighbor as yourself has often been described as one of the hardest commandments to follow. Why is this so hard? I think I mentioned this earlier. It's because, in my opinion, it's because people don't see the world like I do. Mm-hmm. That's the bottom line. I mean, that's really the difference between us. Mm-hmm. Is if I get along great with people who see the world the same as I do, and if they have the similar personality, then we're all good. We're not going to have any issues. But it's people we don't agree with and in this day and time, man. It's just worse than it's ever. Well, we shouldn't say it's worse than it's ever been. I'm sure there have been times in the past
more blatant.
It's been rough, but now, it's. Gosh, we're so siloed.
It's in your face, and
And we all want the world on our terms. We want the world to conform to our vision of what the world is supposed to look like, and we see, like we talk about evidence and seeing things and. I remember back, and I don't want to get too controversial here, but when the COVID things happened, I felt like very early I had a finger on. I was reading, I was watching, and I saw stuff, and I felt like I knew what was going on and what we should and shouldn't do, and I felt like we were going way overboard, and it was just so frustrating to me because I didn't understand. And then in the end, you go back and you look at it, and you realize I was right. I was right the whole time. See, so now what does that do for me? Well, now when you don't agree with me, then obviously my attitude is, well, I know I'm right because I'm going to be proven right.
Right.
And so we just double down on that stuff because when something like that happens, right?
Which is wrong.
Which is wrong. Which is totally
it is. I mean,
wrong.
It's ooh.
Yeah.
We're stomping each other's toes today, Dean.
Well, here's a good, let me give you another controversial example of this that really surprised me this week. So
Are we going to get emails on this one?
we might. So, we talk about how bad social media is and how social media is destroying our kids.
Yeah.
And we pretty much lay everything at the feet of social media, right? Mm-hmm. Well, do you know that in Israel, kids get their phones earlier than they do in America? And they don't have the same problems with kids in Israel as we do in America. So if it's the phones and the social media, why isn't it affecting them? Well, here's the difference. Here's the difference between Israel and America. In Israel, they're very, very family oriented.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say.
And
even here, it's not the phone, and it's not the social media.
But we say it. We talk about it like it is.
We do, and I have, but it's the parentalship behind it.
Yeah. It is.
I say that gingerly.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because a lot of times it's a pacifier.
Yeah.
And that's where things goes off the rail.
Right.
Things go off the rails.
But my point in bringing it up is that there are things out there that we think we know that we don't really know.
Sure.
And we need to be open to other people's points of view. Now, I'm not saying, we need everything to come back to the Bible. The Bible is our litmus test. The Bible is true. But because somebody doesn't believe the Bible, we can't shut them out either, because then how are we going to have that conversation with them, right? So, we just have to learn to love people for no matter what their circumstances are. And that's what the Bible tells us. Last question. What does Jesus mean when he says, "As I have loved you, so you must love one another"? What are some ways that we can love like Jesus? I think we just, and she kind of mentions this in her story. I think we have to look at everybody as if I want that person to spend eternity with God. And I think we have to look at everybody that way and be heartbroken when that is not the case. We need to be heartbroken when we hear that person shouting things that we don't agree with and are very anti-biblical and anti-God. We need to have compassion for that person rather than contempt for that person. Mm-hmm. Because now I'm not saying we need to adapt their worldview. I'm just saying we need to look at that person as if, I feel bad for that person because they don't have that relationship with God that I have, right?
We don't need to adapt their worldview, but we need to provide the worldview that we know. And that's the thing that's so hard to me. And I guess I compare it to a child. One of the most frustrating things, I shouldn't say frustrated. I get frustrated. It's nothing to do with them. About kids is they just don't know how to do things. And I do, and it's, this is a little transparent, but I'm like, you should know how to do this. And then, my helper, my wife, she's like, well, they don't know how to do that. And that's why you need to teach them. And so when I hear people and I go on the news and I see what's going on college campuses, and you just want to, you want to go grab those teenagers and just give them in a headlock and give them a noogie. I don't know. Yeah. It gets you so angry to see what's going on, but they don't know.
That's right.
And that is what's so hard about it is, and the only way they're going to know is if we close our mouth and stop pointing our finger and saying, you should do this. That never works.
Yep. That's right.
We need to show them the love of Jesus the way Jesus would show the love of Jesus.
Yep.
And I don't give them a pass, but you almost, in some standpoints, some ways you got to look at it as you do got to give them a pass.
Yeah.
They don't know.
You can't hold them to the same standards.
Right.
that you hold yourself to.
But the self-righteousness in us wants to say, you should think like I think. What they don't, they don't even have the book.
Yep.
They've never opened this book.
Yep.
They don't know what it says. They don't even, many of them don't even know what the name of Jesus means nowadays. They don't, when you say a book of the Bible, they think that's a story time, but I don't know. And so many times we got to get off our high horse before we can make any kind of impact on some of these big social issues. But we get all high and mighty and start pointing fingers, and I mean, it's hard to say because I'm the chief among them sometimes. And we have to understand that many of these people that we like to complain about and point our fingers at, they're ignorant. And I don't say ignorant as a bad word.
Right.
Ignorance is just a lack of knowledge. And we're the ones with the knowledge. So if they don't know, then whose fault is it?
That's right.
It's our fault.
That's right. Bottom line.
Yeah.
Upward Sports Run for God Run Club is the best way to stay motivated for your fitness journey and your faith journey. You get these weekly podcasts, but there is so much more. We have proven training plans available for you, whether you're just at the beginning of your fitness quest or you've been running for 20 years. We have something for everyone, and it doesn't matter where you are with God either. We have something for you there, too. If you're not a member, join today at runforgod.com. It is the best value you will find. All right, we're back. And this story, golly, this is such a cool story. I saw this little podcast. The lady's name is Adele Roberts, and she's a DJ and an author in Great Britain. She just set a Guinness World Record. She ran a marathon in 3 hours, 32 minutes, and 22 seconds. It was pretty fast. But you say, the world record is over an hour faster. What in the world is the big deal about running a 3:30 marathon? Well, here's the big deal with it. Adele Roberts did that with a stoma. You know what a stoma is? Mm-hmm. So I didn't realize that was a word that kind of encompasses all these things. An ileostomy she has. I'm familiar with the term colonoscopy, but apparently in either case, it's basically having your intestines kind of interrupted and having to do that function outside the body.
Yeah, my dad had one.
Yeah. And it's one of those things. I mean, she talks about how she can see her intestines outside her body. That's just weird, right? Mm-hmm. But she's running marathons. Mm-hmm.
Well, there's some, I won't say any names, and you may not even know it. I know it. There's some run club members.
Yeah.
That have stomas, and because they've shared it with me.
And they just get out there and do it anyway. Yeah.
They don't let it slow them down, which is awesome.
And this lady she named her stoma. It's called Audrey. And she talks about Audrey as if she's like this person that just kind of hangs with her, you know? And she jokes about it, which is refreshing.
It is.
Because, this is a very serious thing. We're not making light of this at all. It's a very serious thing. But, we talk about laughter being the best medicine. This is a good example. Mm-hmm. Now, she had cancer. That's what made all of this necessary. Yeah. And during the time she had the cancer and she was going through chemotherapy, she was determined to get in a 5K every day. Mm-hmm. And sometimes that was a relatively slow walk, but she was determined to get in her 5K every day. And she did. And she was persistent no matter how she felt. And she got through all that. So this is a lot. I mean, this is the way to handle setbacks, right? So before she started this serious training, she ran to see how fast she thought she was, kind of a projection for what she thought she would run the marathon in, and it turned out to be 5 hours and 40 minutes. Well, you'll notice that's a lot slower than 3:30. But then she got into better shape. She started to run some more, and she looked into the world record, and they told her that the world record, she would have to run under 4 hours, and she thought, I don't see any way I'm going to be able to do that. And then even during the marathon, she thought, I'm not on target. I'm not going to be able to make it. And she said, at 21 miles, she just kind of took off and finished well. And she wound up breaking that record by a long way, a lot more than she thought. She thought maybe I broke it, but then she realized, and then she saw the clock. She was like, oh my goodness, I had no idea I was going that fast, which was pretty cool. But she also talked about how there were times when she was training where there were really, really rough days where she's bent over double, and this lady looks really fit. And here's this fit lady moving really slow, bent over double, and people are looking at her like, what are you doing out here? And I thought it was a great picture of how a lot of times people are worried about what they look like out doing things. A lot of big people, they're worried that, well, people are going to make fun of me because I'm out there and I'm doing this. Don't worry about it. Even if they are, don't worry about it, right? Just do what you want to do and do what's good for you. Whether people like it or whether people think it's weird or whatever it is, who cares? Who cares? Just do it, right? I think she's a great example.
Yeah.
About how we should
let anything don't let anything give you an excuse.
Yep.
Not to stay fit.
Yep. And she says when she first started running, she was doing it because she knew it was good for her, but she didn't really like it.
Yeah.
And now she says the word she used was she adores running now because she just went out there and she kept doing it and got to that point. So, yeah. So if you're out there and you're really slow and you're thinking, I cannot get faster, here's a lady who got a lot faster in a relatively short period of time, even with all of those.
With a medical condition.
Yeah. All right, it's a time for Dean's Thoughts. That's a time when I share something that I've written about the intersection between running and faith. Well, I've talked with many who tell me that visualization doesn't work well for them. And so I thought about that. These are my thoughts. It's called Why Visualization Doesn't Always Work. I talk about visualization a lot. It's a great tool to get your mind ready for a race or even an upcoming tough workout. It is really effective for most people, but for some, it doesn't seem to help. So I rubbed my brain to try to figure out why, and here is what I think. The main focus of visualization is to get yourself in the proper mindset. The proper mindset is one where you react in a positive way to the stimuli that comes your way. You're trying to create an auto response in your brain to things that happen during the race or the workout. But I wonder if some people's visualization is something slightly different. If you have been unsuccessful with visualization, think of a time when you tried to go through the process. What was your main focus? Was it on the people and surroundings or on you? I have a theory that many people look at visualization as just watching the race unfold as sort of a disinterested third party. If that's you, let me tell you where you have gone wrong. If your visualization is simply picturing the race unfolding, you're picturing the race happening to you. If your focus is on the uneasy feeling of pushing yourself, you're allowing the feeling to control you. Those things are important, but it's how you interpret them and react to them that can make all the difference. Instead of focusing on what is happening around you, turn your thoughts to how you respond to those things. Your main interest should be what you are going to do to work around those things. Instead of worrying about the nervous feeling you have, by turning your attention to how you execute your race plan, you're going to minimize the effects of the nervousness. You never want to amplify feelings that make you feel less confident. Visualization can be a powerful tool, but like all tools, it's not effective if it's deployed incorrectly. Your focus should be on execution. If it's anywhere else, take a step back and reevaluate how you do it. It is a subtle difference and is easy to fall into the spectator role. After all, we're inundated with things on our screens designed for us to watch and learn or enjoy. We watch as a third party all the time, every day. So switching to a proactive part of what is playing on the screen is not our normal way of thinking, but it is a subtle and easy switch to make. The next time you have a big event and you want to perform your best, try visualization and be sure to make yourself and your execution the main focus. We can say the same thing about our relationship with God. Many people make the same mistake we make with visualization. We read the Bible as if we're a bystander watching what God is doing. We pray as if we are sending a letter to God that we hope to get a response to. But that's not what God wants from us. He wants an intimate relationship. He wants us to be an active part of that relationship too. John 17:3 says, "And this is eternal life, that they may know you, the only true God, and Jesus Christ, whom you have sent." That's a relationship where we are active participants. To be clear, no one is trying to sabotage their visualization efforts before a big event, nor is anyone trying to diminish their spiritual walk with Christ. But it is easy to focus on what is happening around us rather than how we respond to what is happening around us. Our society is awfully centered on our victimhood status, and that invites us to think in terms of what is happening to us rather than our reaction to it. This is just one more way that we are called to be different from the world. Focus on execution, certainly in your running or walking, but more importantly, your relationship with Jesus. He wants our active participation in our relationship with Him. Only then will we reap the benefits of that relationship.
It's a great story, Dean. That makes me... I was at I don't remember which coaching education it was. I think it might have been the youth and junior certification I got for triathlon, but one of the other coaches that I was there with was talking about this very thing, and he said something that made so much sense, and it's exactly what you're talking about here. He said a lot of times people visualize, and it's like they're watching TV.
Yeah.
And that's the way they look at it. But they said visualization done correctly, you should have deja vu when you get to the start line.
Yeah.
As if you've done this before.
Mm-hmm.
And that means putting yourself, I mean, we with athletes, we even used to say, we would put them in a dark room, turn the lights off, and we would start talking them through a race. Mm-hmm. And so when they got down in the water the next day at the start line, they feel like, I've done this before.
Yep.
They hadn't, but it was visualization done correctly.
That's the whole idea.
It's not watching a TV.
Yeah.
Yeah. But that's how most people do it.
Well, and again, the number of screens we have in our face these days, that's what we're used to doing. So I think it's a little bit harder to do visualization correctly today than it was, say, 20 years ago, before the advent of the smartphone and all of that stuff, right? Mm-hmm. I think it makes a big difference.
Yeah, I mean, and we hear things like picture yourself doing this. Well, that's not visualization.
Right.
That's watching from the outside.
Yeah.
When we would walk young athletes through visualization, we would say, like getting ready for a triathlon, we would say, okay, step down in the water. Mm-hmm. What does it feel like? Mm-hmm. Who's to your right, who's to your left? It's really putting them in that scenario, and that's real visualization.
Yeah.
And it's effective. It's very effective.
Yeah. And the coolest thing about it is, if you've been doing it incorrectly, it's easy to change it.
Sure.
Very easy.
It's just perspective.
Yeah. It's a subtle change. Yeah. It's funny too, because I got to thinking about this because we were talking I don't know if it was last podcast or the one before that, we were talking about how we don't need to fix everything.
Right.
And then here we are talking about how to fix something. Good thing God gives us discernment.
Well, it's just a shift in perspective. I mean, it's an easy fix.
Yep.
So do you visualize a lot? Do you visualize races?
I do all the time. Yeah. I mean, I've already visualized that 100-miler. I don't know how many times.
And the important thing about visualization is you need to visualize what could go wrong.
Yeah.
Because the whole idea behind visualization is, okay, Dean, you're at mile 78 and you're getting rock gut. What are you going to do?
Keep going.
So when you get to mile 78 or 50 and you do get rock gut, guess what? You've already made the decision what you're going to do.
That's right.
But left to make the decision in the moment,
yeah,
that's a tough place to be because your body's going to scream, take the easy route.
That's right.
Throw in the towel, call it a day. You went far enough. But if you decided in your visualization how you're going to handle that, it's so much easier to handle it that way.
Yeah. I'll never forget, I read a story about somebody. I don't remember what kind of race he was in. Whatever race he was in, though, was an ultra race. And he had like 5 more miles to go or something like that. And he was ready to call it quits. He sat down on a chair and he was done. He was done. And I think it was his wife came over to him and said, "You will hate yourself tomorrow if you don't get out of that chair and finish." Mm-hmm. And it was such a great thing because he was like, because he wasn't thinking about that. He wasn't thinking about tomorrow. He was thinking about right now.
Yeah.
And that changed his perspective. He got up and he finished it and he was glad he did. And of course he thanked his wife for it. But that's important. Yeah.
We used to even say, I remember some of the visualization sessions. We would say, okay, you're in the swim right now. You've got people all over you. Okay, your goggles just got kicked off. Mm-hmm. I mean, that's one of those things you just don't think about, but it can really happen. And we had a lot of kids that actually happened to. And guess what? They didn't panic.
That's right.
They rolled over. They put their goggles back on. They rolled back over, and they went swimming again because they had done that in their head many times.
Yeah. I think the thing that comes to mind for me when this happened to me was when, and I've told this story before, but it bears repeating, I think, here. I had run every day for 5.5 years, and my intention was just to keep doing that. And I won't go through all the details, but at one point I realized I had forgotten to run. And so I wake up at 4 o'clock in the morning, and what does my brain automatically do? My brain automatically goes to, how do I fix this? How do I change the circumstances that I'm in? And that was the wrong perspective because I couldn't change the circumstances I'm in. And when you're in the middle of a race, you can't change the circumstances you're in. You have to deal with, okay, now what?
What do I do?
And so I felt this shift in my brain from, okay, you can't change anything. So how should you think about this? And my very intentional thing was to say, okay, God, what are you trying to tell me through this? And God very clearly told me what he told me. He said, listen, I know you worry about being obsessed with running and it being too important to you. And maybe you feel like sometimes you put it before me, but if you can forget to run, clearly it's not as overwhelming as you think it might be. And it was a relief to me. And it was amazing how just changing my brain from, oh my gosh, I'm a victim of my circumstances, to, okay, what can I do to best react to the circumstances? It changed everything. And today it's, 7.5 years ago? And today I'm glad I missed that day. I mean, it's the craziest thing.
Yeah.
And that's what we're talking about. You have to change the way you look at things.
Yeah.
At Upward Sports and Run for God, we're all about helping you on your fitness journey. But we also want to support you on your faith journey as well. Sign up today for the self-paced Bible in a Year Challenge and listen every day as I read through the entire Bible in 365 episodes. As a bonus, I also give you running and walking tips of the day and finish with a different encouraging quote in each episode. You must be a Run Club member to participate in this exciting and edifying challenge. Sign up and start listening today. Every day I share a reason why running, and every week.
You do this podcast with somebody else then that I don't know about?
Every week I share a reason why running and walking is so awesome. And this week it's this: storms won't derail us. Okay, so just off camera here, you were talking about how you got out yesterday in the storm and got in some walking.
Yeah.
Because you had committed to doing that. And
9 o'clock last night.
Yeah. And, for many sports, you can't do that, right? Sure. You're not going to go outside and play basketball in the rain and the lightning. So what happens with running is, at best, it might delay us. It could delay us, but it never has to be fully canceled. I don't know. I mean, I've only seen just a couple, 2 or 3 races in my entire life that have ever been canceled. I remember one track meet that we were supposed to participate in that was canceled one time. And other than that, I just don't remember. I remember them being canceled ahead of time because we won't talk about, all of that. But there's not a reason a lot of times to do that. So our sport is better because we can weather the storms better than any other sport.
So between me and you, we coached a triathlon team for 11 years.
Yep.
How many practices did we cancel?
Zero. We moved a couple.
Yeah.
But
from morning to afternoon to.
Yep.
Yeah.
But that's the point.
Those parents to this day still talk about that fact that nobody would call us and say, hey, it's storming. Are we having practice? Nope. Yes, we're having practice.
Yep.
Sometimes we would go inside if we had to, or we probably got a little too close to lightning a few times.
Yeah.
That's what this past weekend I was with a guy that was at that practice. He said, you remember that practice when You told Dean to watch the radar to see how close the lightning was getting, because we had kids out on the track.
Yeah.
And then within like 10 minutes, I'm convinced the lightning hit Crow Road right beside the track. And I looked at Dean. He's like, I didn't see that coming. So we probably got a little too close for comfort. Yeah. But they all remember it. They remember that sometimes we don't make excuses.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, we just had the 70th anniversary of Roger Bannister's first sub 4 minute mile.
Wow.
May the 6th, 1954 was when he did it. And I learned something new about it that I didn't know. I did not know that Chris Brasher was one of his pacers for that race. And he false started. And they had to start the race over again because he false started. If that had happened today, if you false start, the rule is that you're out of the race. Mm-hmm. And think about that. That would have changed the course of history. Had he been out of the race, they would have had to try it another day. Because I'm sure he probably wouldn't have done it without his pacer there, who ran those first 2 laps for him in front of him. So another interesting
years.
Yeah. Yeah. Another interesting thing about that run, that, they thought they were going to postpone the run because it was stormy and windy that day. And of course, if you're trying to shave off tenths of seconds, the wind makes a difference.
Mm-hmm. Sure.
And so they didn't want to go if it was going to be windy. Well, the wind died down. They were scheduled to start at 6:10 p.m. and the wind died down just a few minutes before 6:10 p.m. So it went off. There's also been a lot of talk about how the 4 minute barrier, how Roger Bannister did it, and then everybody else did it. Like he opened up this mental thing, which is not true. But it persists to this day that people think that. And one of the reasons is because Roger Bannister did it, and then John Landy did it 46 days later. Mm-hmm. But the thing everybody doesn't realize was John Landy was close. He had already run 4:01 like 5 times before that. The guy had been very, very close before that. And so it was just a matter of time before he was going to do it. And Bannister just happened to beat him to it. But then nobody broke 4 minutes for another year after that. Mm-hmm. And now on the Olympics were held the next year, and there were 5 who did it that day. But I think that probably would have happened anyway.
You think?
And here's...
See, I kind of fall on that side of...
I know you do.
Once you see somebody do something, if you're that kind of person that's wired that way, you think, well, there's no reason I can't do it.
Yeah.
Especially if you're at that level and you're that close. I don't know. I
argue
you and I differ. We differ a little there.
I argue that people that are at that level, they're trying to get every second they can get, and they don't care about what anybody else is doing.
That's true, but I think some of them do care about. I don't know. Subconsciously, consciously.
Well, it was a little bit different for the 4 minute barrier too, because there were really scientists and people saying they didn't think they could.
And time will tell. Time will prove me right or time will prove me wrong. That when somebody breaks the 2 hour barrier, somebody else would do it within the next year or two. But I think one of our best hopes, unfortunately, died in a car crash.
Yeah.
Because I think he seemed to be the guy that was
it sure looked like
it.
Yeah.
But I don't know. Well, that'll be a good test.
Yeah.
Once that's because I think that I think that'll happen in the next coming years. Yeah, I hope it'll happen where we're still talking about it on this podcast.
Yeah, I think it'll eventually happen. I don't think it's going to happen anytime soon, but I think it will happen.
Well, it doesn't seem like there's anybody on the radar right now.
Yeah.
Last year there was somebody on the radar.
Yeah.
But I hope we can debate it on this podcast.
Yeah,
I hope I'm
too.
right. And I get to say, hey, Dean, I was right.
Yeah, we'll see. The thing about this time period, think about 1954, okay? 1954 is 10 years after the war, a little less than 10 years after the war, World War II. World War II held up everything. So there were no records being set during World War II, right? And so the thought is that a lot of this was that momentum had to build back up after World War II to get people back in shape and back to running well, and that's why it happened when it happened, which, kind of makes some sense. And then here's the other point that kind of supports my side of the way I think about it is the high school 4 minute barrier. It was broken in 1965. And then the next year, it was broke again. And then so 3 years in a row, you had somebody who ran sub 4. And then it was 33 years before somebody did it again, before Alan Webb did it. Why would there be all that time there? We had proved it could be done, right?
Sure.
I mean, it just so happens you had some special people in the 60s that ran with, and
well, you got to look back too. This is kind of countering my argument, but you got to think too, the guys that broke it 33 years later.
The guy. Because it was another over 10 years.
Or even some of the guys now. And please hear me when I say I am not minimalizing a sub 4 minute mile at all. I don't care what the circumstances are. You're a rock star if you break sub 4 minutes.
Yep.
But if you take the shoes that Roger Bannister was wearing, the track surface that Roger Bannister was wearing, the lack of training knowledge that Roger Bannister had, and you prescribe that to the people doing it today, I think there would be a pretty substantial difference. Yeah. Maybe not, but I would think that the circumstances back then made Roger Bannister that much more of a rock star.
Yeah, I think
because
you're right.
So many things are so much better now than they were back then. Like I said, I'm not minimalizing the 4 minute mile, because even if you're wearing the super shoes on the tackiest track in the world, that's still your
impressive.
legs are running. It's why I don't throw rocks at Kipchoge doing the sub 2 hour.
Yeah.
In those circles. He ran sub 2 hours.
That's right.
Period.
That's right.
And until you do that, you don't need to minimalize it.
That's right.
Yeah.
Put your stone down.
Yeah.
Well, I'm a huge fan of the mile in general, so this is a big thing for me. Mm-hmm. And I wish we would quit running the 1,500 and the 1,600 meters and go back to running the mile. Yeah. I don't understand why we can't do that.
Well, there's not it's not even laps, Dean.
It's just 9 meters more. It's not, I mean, basically the start and finish line are right there together.
2 more steps, 3 more steps.
Yeah, it's not much. So, yeah, I don't understand it. Well, how about a trivia question for this week? Everybody knows who was the first to break the 4 minute barrier. We just talked about it. But the current world record is 3:43. So who was the first to break the 3 minute and 50 second barrier? Do you know that one? Mm-mm. Well, if you know that one and you're out there listening, you'll send your answer to dean@runforgod.com. If you're a Run Club member and you're the first one to answer it correctly, you will win $20 off in the Run for God store. So get on it. The first to break the 350 barrier. Interesting. Our motivational thought of the week comes from Jonathan Swift. This one's very short and to the point, and I like it.
Who's Jonathan Swift?
He's a writer.
I've heard that name.
Yeah.
Okay.
He said, "May you live all the days of your life." I love that.
That sounds like common sense, but there's more to it there.
Yes.
There's a lot more to it. Yeah.
Yeah. So many of us are just going through life. We're not living life. Yeah. Yeah. I like it. Very good. Make every day count.
Before before we sign off here, do all the things that we talk about, because you mentioned that we had a bump in the podcast this week, and that's not because of anything we're doing different.
Right.
That's because of what you, the listeners, are doing. You're liking it, you're sharing it, you're commenting on it, you're giving us ratings, all the different things, and it really does help. We don't have a huge marketing budget that we use for this podcast. The only way this podcast gets out is either through our Run Club members or people out there who may not be members, but they're sharing it. They're saying, hey, send it to a friend. Hey, I heard this. I do this all the time.
Yep.
Not only with our podcast, but many other podcasts. I've probably sent you podcasts.
Yep.
Hey, Dean, I heard this today. I thought this was pretty cool. Send it to you. Do that. It really, really helps us out. So if you want to help us at Run for God, Upper Running, continue to share the gospel through this sport that we all love, share this podcast.
Good way to do it. And until next week, may God bless every step of every run and or walk. Go out there and shine your light.
Good job, Dean.
For more information about the Run for God ministry, go to runforgod.com. If you have questions about your salvation, click on the Peace with God tab. There's nothing more important. Thanks for joining us today.